So many salespeople are so focused on coming across like the expert and being sharp as a tack that they are afraid to get something wrong. This does not concern me at all because what I actually need in a sales conversation is different. It's momentum. As long as I have momentum and you are able to keep talking to me and telling me what's important, I'll be able to establish myself as the authority based on what you say to me. I do not need to be perfect. And you listening right now, the person listening to this podcast, repeat this out loud like a mantra. You do not need to be perfect either. Welcome, everyone, to the Close More Sales podcast. On today's episode, we're going to focus on a technique that can really sharpen your sales conversations, and that's probing through assumptive language. Instead of just asking straightforward questions, this approach involves making informed assumptions about your prospect's situation or needs. And the goal is to get them to either confirm what you've said or correct you, which gives you a clearer picture of what's really going on in their mind. This method helps you move past surface level responses and uncover the deeper motivations that can make or break a sale. By the end of this episode, hopefully, you'll have a new practical tool that you can use in your next conversation to better guide the discussion to get to the heart of what your prospect really wants. So, why listen to this show? What's the purpose of this show anyway? The purpose of this podcast is to empower sales professionals and entrepreneurs to push themselves to grow, achieve unimaginable success without burning out, and ultimately transform their lives. I'm Ian Ross, and I am obsessed with all things sales, and I work with teams across the English-speaking world to make more money by asking better questions. The most proven path to achieving financial freedom is maximizing your earning potential, and a sales role is the lowest barrier for entry with the highest possible ceiling for entry onto that path. Anyone can become a killer salesperson with the right techniques, mindset, and consistency. Everything we cover on this podcast is geared toward one thing: helping you close more sales so you can live the life you want. If you would like to get a sheet breaking down all the things to say in a follow-up call, text follow up to 33777, and we'll send you a template of what to say on the phone when following up, completely for free, no strings attached. So, into today's episode, mastering assumptive language, probing for deeper insights in sales conversations. Let's dive a little bit into the psychology behind assumptive language and discuss how to use it in your sales conversations, and then provide practical examples and some tips on how to start utilizing it to help you master this technique, at least enough to implement it, if nothing else, in pursuit of mastery, right? So by the end of this episode, you will hopefully have a new tool, and it's in your sales arsenal ready to be pulled out to help you guide those conversations along, get to the truth of the matter, and effectively close more sales. So what is assumptive language anyway? What are we even talking about by this? If you're unfamiliar with this term, this might seem bizarre. Assumptive language involves making educated guesses, let's say, or statements, assumptions about a prospect situation, their motivations, or objections during a sales conversation. The goal is to encourage the prospect to react, to continue the conversation along. So many salespeople are so focused on coming across like the expert and being sharp as a tack that they are afraid to get something wrong. This does not concern me at all because what I actually need in a sales conversation is different. It's momentum. As long as I have momentum and you are able to keep talking to me and telling me what's important, I'll be able to establish myself as the authority based on what you say to me. I do not need to be perfect. And you listening right now, the person listening to this podcast, repeat this out loud like a mantra. You do not need to be perfect either. If I make a strategically assumptive statement, the prospect is very likely to react to me. And that reaction can usually only be followed by a handful of things. They will either confirm, correct, and elaborate, or they won't really react much at all. That's it. Those are the only real options in terms of how they will respond to an assumption, if done correctly. If they tell me I am right, it demonstrates that I understand them. And if I am wrong in my statement, they will correct me and reveal the deeper insights into their actual situation or their state of mind. Now, understand there are some psychological drivers behind assumptive language and as to why this is so effective. First, even why make a statement at all instead of asking a question? Think of it this way. It's very easy to lie to a question. I've talked about this on the podcast before. It's easy when asked a direct question, especially a yes or no question, to lie to it. Because usually when people lie, it's because they have to, because they don't want to reveal the truth when confronted with a question. This concept is really key to understand because what's also important about it is that when someone is offering up new information, as in not ask the question directly, they are far less likely to lie. In fact, it is far easier to lie to a question than it is to let an incorrect statement stand. I'll repeat that. It is far easier to lie in answer to an easy question than it is to let an incorrect statement stand. So, even though I am probably trying to make a statement that is correct, if it is wrong, it doesn't necessarily hurt me because the prospect will correct me. They won't let that incorrect statement stay as it is. So we're going to get into more practical examples here in a second and how you can start applying this. The first psychological principle as to why this is so effective is called cognitive dissonance. When you make an assumption that isn't quite accurate, it can create this feeling of cognitive dissonance for the prospect. And they feel compelled to resolve this internal discomfort by correcting you. And in the nature of their correction, it provides valuable new information about their real thoughts and feelings. The second thing is this taps into almost an aspect of loss aversion. Assumptive language can start to dig into the prospect's fear of a loss. Because if a statement is made, not a question, a statement, the assumption is that statement is fact. That's how language usually works when people are making statements. So if I make a statement which is not true, and there's an aspect of that statement which is almost like taking it away from them, they can feel the loss aversion. And the fear of loss, the prospect's fear of loss, is a very strong motivator. And it's not just in decision-making in general, but in the urgency behind that decision. By framing assumptions around potential losses, whether it's time, money, or simply convenience, you can prompt the prospect to clarify their priorities and move closer to a decision by telling you what's really going on. There's also an aspect of confirmation bias because prospects tend to seek information that aligns with their existing beliefs. So if you make assumptions that match these beliefs, if you are correct, you can subtly even reinforce their motivations and guide them toward the outcome you desire as a sales professional. Okay? So the real key here is that regardless of whether or not the statement I make is true or if it is wrong, doesn't really matter because they either agree with me and give me a that's right, which we always want to be in pursuit of, or they correct me and we can figure it out from there. So I'd still want to be strategic. Any individual statement doesn't matter. I want to be strategic about which statements I use and how I use them. So let's break down some examples of this in use because this truly is a communication tool, and this could be used regardless of whether or not you are actually trying to make a sale. This is done in communication, in conversation. It just happens to be this is a sales podcast, but this helps you figure out how to get people to reveal what's really going on. So we'll start with a broader concept someone might be having unrelated to whatever it is you're selling. Let's say you're talking to an older prospect, a gentleman who's considering retiring, but if he retires, it might throw a wrench in whether or not he has either a need or the budget for what you sell. So we need to get some clarity on what he's thinking about retiring. So when the prospect mentions concerns about retiring, let's say he seems a little unsure. Then you might say, to extract this out, it sounds like you're thinking about retiring soon, but you still feel uncertain as to whether your finances will support you through that. Even if this assumption isn't accurate, let's say it's not the finances that he's concerned about, it encourages the prospect to clarify their true concerns. This old man, in this instance, he would either be like, yeah, that's true, it is the finances. Or if it's something else entirely, it will give me a clearer picture as to what is actually going on. I am not worried about whether or not that statement is true because I didn't declare it to be an objective fact. That's a key point here. I make my assumption with non-committal language, even though the assumption is kind of an extreme. In this case, that non-committal language was through a labeling statement. It sounds like. This is the goal of assumptive language like this, to seek clarity. And when I do that, there needs to be an element of extremeness within the statement, but not in how I propose it, right? So it sounds like is not, here's objective reality. That's key. I'm proposing it with non-committal language, but the statement itself should have an element of an extremeness to it so that they feel compelled to elaborate and correct in case it is not true. If it's truly neutral, it's almost not polarizing enough to be worthy of a that's right, or I won't get it corrected. So here's an example of how to do it wrong. If I'm talking to someone about their house and the roof is 5 years old or something, and I know their storm has been through, and I could see from an image that I know there's some damage, and I'm trying to get them to tell me there might be some damage, even though it's 5 years old. The wrong way to do that might be like, it sounds like since your roof is only 5 years old, it's in decent enough shape. It sounds like is the mild non-committal language of the labeling statement. But decent enough shape is not extreme enough in a statement for them to feel the need to correct me. Because even if they know there's damage, they might go, yeah, it's in decent enough shape. So nothing was gained by that. I didn't call out an emotion that got understood. I was talking about an objective reality, but I wasn't extreme enough to have them give me more clarity. If I say, it sounds like since the roof is 5 years old, it's in absolutely flawless shape, like it hasn't even been affected by storms, that is more likely to get corrected because there's an extremeness. It's in flawless shape. It's perfect. No damage from storms, because now they're going to feel the need to want to correct that rather than good enough shape. Another example of doing this wrong could be really committed language around something else outside of it. So otherwise it's too strong. So what I mean by that is instead of it seems like, it sounds like, it feels like, or something along those lines, I might go, the roof is definitely in perfect condition. That's an extreme statement. The problem is when I'm wrong about that, and it's weird to use the roof as an example because that is an objective reality. Let's say it's something of my perception of them. If I say, you're definitely not concerned with this at all. If they are concerned a little bit, they might correct me. But by the nature of declaring it as objective fact, not through an aspect of non-committal language in a labeling statement, that actually does hurt my credibility as an authority. There is a nuance there. I hope it's clear. I'm okay to be corrected as long as I offer the information in a way where the correction doesn't damage my awareness necessarily, because I'm still just pointing out a perspective. There's a nuance to it, but it's really important to get this distinction right because it's very powerful. Let me give a few more examples here, so how you can think about how to apply this to your actual conversations. If someone has concerns about price of whatever it is I'm selling, I might make a statement like, it sounds like keeping costs within your budget is the single most important priority to you. And if you can't afford this, you'll just keep dealing with this problem. Does that make sense? It sounds like this price is the single most important thing. And if you can't afford it, you'll just keep dealing with the problem. That's an example of the correct amount of assumptive language. It's inviting a correction But if I am right, now I have information that is valuable to me to know the budget has to work. There's no stretching this in terms of cost. There's no financing in a way that could make this happen because the problem, by highlighting the difference between how important the problem is to deal with and the price, it gives them the chance to be like, yeah, I wouldn't spend. I'm so concerned about money. The problem's not a big enough deal outside of my concerns with budget. And so then you are correct, and you get to get like an aspect of even more authority rather, by them going, yeah, that's right. That's how I feel about this. But it also invites correction. Another example, if there are other decision makers involved, let's say I'm talking to, it's in a B2C setup, and I know there's a spouse involved. And traditionally, let's say it's the purchase of a car or something. I'm going to do car stuff. Let's say it's anything that involves something where normally someone wants to check with their spouse, their husband, their wife, whatever. Then I want to call that out because I know there's someone else is involved. And the way to do that would be an assumptive statement. Like, you probably need to run this by your spouse first. And there's no way you'd be able to make a decision without them on this call now anyway. It sounds like you need to get your spouse on the phone because you wouldn't even be able to make a decision right now without them on this call or without them here with us. It's inviting a correction, and the nature of that correction serves my process. Or if it's true, I know what I need to do next because I understand what the reality is. I'm calling out an aspect of hesitation, an objection ahead of time through a labeling statement with assumptive language, and giving them the chance to correct me in a way that serves moving the process along or confirms what I call out, and now we're on the same page. That's the value there. Let's say there's some timing urgency, and I know that's an issue. I could say, it seems like getting this sorted before the end of the year is something that's not a big priority for you right now. Right? That gives them the chance to be like, no, I got to get this way before the end of the year. Or, yeah, it's not that big a priority. If they have a fear of commitment, let's say I'm sensing a fear of commitment, I want to call that out in a way that gives them the chance to also correct me. That serves moving them through my process. So if they have a fear of commitment, I could say, it sounds like you're feeling hesitant to move forward. You probably wouldn't feel comfortable doing so even if this was free. That's the key there about that. The extremeness is they wouldn't even feel comfortable doing so, even if this was free. That's the extreme part of the statement. It gives them the chance to elaborate what's really going on. This is the power of statements like this. Rather than the question, would you even do this if it was free? The difference is they are far more likely to deal with the assumptive statement than they are to just answer that question honestly, especially if they're already on guard. That's the power of that, especially if they're likely to lie to me. Right? If I think someone is lying to me, and sales professionals are very familiar with this sensation, you suddenly realize this person is not being upfront with me. They're not telling me what's really going on. They're not being open and honest with me. If you realize that is the case, questions are almost useless because you cannot trust what they tell you. In that case, you want to switch to assumptive statements because they are less likely to lie to it. They're more likely to correct an incorrect statement. Another example, let's say your prospect is shopping around and they're considering a competitor. I might say, I would guess that right now you're so early in the stages of figuring out what you need that there's nothing we could do to help you get this process started anyway. Right? That's the value of that there. It's the extreme statement is at the end, which is often how this is structured. I want the more extreme statement at the end of my assumptive language because that's always what sticks out. If I start with the assumptive and end with something less committal, they're less likely to address it because they're going to remember the less committed part. So the more extreme part of the statement should always be at the end. It gives you more opportunity for them to correct me. And again, if it's true, then I continue to reinforce the authority, the right type of rapport, which is trust, by accurately calling out a fact that was a little bit extreme. and showing I understand them. I understand their situation. I understand what they're going through. What's also powerful here is including aspects of things your prospect has already said to you. This is why I always talk about using variables within your questions, such as X and Y. I always say things like that, X, Y, and Z, right? So an example of that might be, let's say that the prospect had a negative experience in the past with similar products, okay? I might say, it seems like you might not be ready to invest in something like in this right now because you told me X and Y. And in that instance, X could be that the last time you sign up for something like this, they didn't provide the support they promised. And let's say that Y is that they're not sure this is the most important problem for them to fix first, right? So then it would come out, if I was giving that whole sentence, I might say, it seems like you might not actually be ready to invest in something like this right now because you told me the last time you paid for a program, they didn't provide the support you needed, and you probably don't even feel like this problem needs to be addressed anyway. I am packaging in the hesitation that I'm sensing with circumstances that are unique to them, right? And that's an example of how this will work with variables, where those variables are meant to be filled with things that the prospect has already revealed to you through the course of your conversation, whether it's their hesitation, their needs, their wants, their objections, their obstacles, whatever. There are endless possibilities in terms of how you can utilize this technique. And you probably need to watch this episode again to make sure you catch it. But what is most important is that you actually start doing it. Don't wait to have the perfect line memorized. Don't wait until you know exactly what to say now, what to say next in every single possible scenario. That's not actually how you learn a technique. Start implementing these tactics as soon as possible. Do it with your older prospects, people who you don't think should even be leads anyway. Let's say they were qualified wrong. Practice on friends, practice on family. Don't wait until revenue is on the line to try this, because then you either A, won't actually do it anyway, or B, you'll do it wrong because you were nervous and you'll think it doesn't work at all. Get the practice in by practicing when you aren't risking real money, when you aren't risking your commission check. This is how you start implementing tactics and techniques, specifically new tactics and techniques, okay? So please you're probably gonna need to watch this episode again because I went through a bunch of examples quickly. So write some down yourself. Come up with some options that you could have for different scenarios in your own language. You don't have to copy me exactly. I speak my way. You might speak your way. But the principle of assumptive language, either confirming or getting more clarity on the statement, as long as it is phrased through non-committal language at the start and ending in a more extreme statement so that they are likely to correct and elaborate and tell you what's really going on at the end. As long as you phrase it that way, you should start doing this. Start finding ways to implement this in your own voice, and start with your coworkers, start with your friends, do it when you call your mom, whatever. Get the practice in, because the practice is how you actually start implementing it. I've given this example before. If you read a book on how to invest like Warren Buffett, and then at the end you close the book and go, boy, that was great. That was really entertaining. I really enjoyed that. And you don't do anything, it was just entertainment. It wasn't education. The information is only education if you implement it. Don't use the Close More Sales podcast as something that is entertainment. This is meant to give you actionable advice to help you close more sales. It's the goal of this. Don't get distracted by the fancy background or whatever, or my beautiful smiling face. Don't focus on that stuff. Focus on what you can implement. How can you use these tactics? What mindset stuff can you start embracing? How can you be more consistent going forward? Implement this stuff when it doesn't matter, to get the practice in, to get the cotton out of your cheeks, as I like to say, to get comfortable. And then you will be able to use it when it matters. Thank you for tuning into today's episode. Remember, every single conversation you have, there is an opportunity to understand your prospect better and then guide them toward making their own decision. Keep practicing, because mastery is attainable. And if you'd like help getting there faster, Text CLOSE to 33777. We'll see if we can help you out along the process. I'm Ian Ross. This has been the Close More Sales Podcast.